Okay, I think we're going to make a start anyway. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. You never know. Hopefully. Everyone see? Great. I think you can. There we go. Okay, so if everyone could just mute just because there's no background noise. That'd be great. They probably will hear my children screaming soon. So with my background, you need to mute. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. It's been a while since we've been together. It's been a bit of a break for various reasons, but we're back. Oh, 1 second, someone just said they wanted to try and get in. I'm just going to reply very quickly. Yeah, so it's been a while since we've all been together, but nice to all be back virtually. And please God, be back in person very soon. So today we're continuing our journey through really Tanakh, and also going to end up sort of modern women as well, looking at different women and what we can learn from them and their characteristics and their character traits. And today we're going to be looking at Rachel. Now she's famously called Mama Rachel. It's actually made famous. I think it was a Shweki song or an MBD song. Don't quote me. One of these famous Jewish singers made a song out of her story, and it became very famous. And it was all about Mama Rachel, about how she was this woman who was crying for her children. And actually, we'll play the song a bit later, so you'll be able to see it live. And we have many questions about Rachel as a matriarch, and we're going to look at her and compare her a little bit to her sister Leah, and see what we can learn about her. So first of all, Rachel's yortzeit, we actually know when it is. We don't always know when all the matriarchs and patriarchs' yortzeits are, but we know that she died on the 11th of Cheshvan. And this yortzeit is commemorated more than most other of the people in Tanakh, more than many other of the individuals. And we have to ask ourselves why that is. Why is it that we all feel this affinity towards her? People all rush to her where she was buried, and they pray, not to her, but around her, in order that she will beseech God on their behalf. And people feel very, very connected to this figure of Mama Rachel. So many paintings are painted of this Mama Rachel crying in heaven. And you're going to see that we've got this connection to her more so than I think any of the other matriarchs that we've been discussing. So that's our first question, really. What is it that connects us to her, that makes us, so connected? That's the first thing. Second of all, she is called really the mother of the Jewish people. She's called, as I said, Mama Rachel. But she wasn't really the mother of the Jewish people, because she actually was only the mother of 2 out of the 12 tribes of Yosef and Binyamin. Whereas the other women, the other Bilhah, Zilpah, and Leah, they had more children than her. So it's strange that she, again, is called this mama figure when she actually numerically didn't have more children than anyone else. That's our second question. Our third question we're going to be looking at is that Rachel was actually buried at the side of the road. She was buried not in the cave of Machpelah, where everyone else, all the other matriarchs and patriarchs, were honored really to be buried. She was buried along the side of the road, and it seems a bit disrespectful and a bit harsh, really, that's where she ends up. This woman, this figure who we're going to come to really respect, was sort of just like left on the side of a road. It seems a bit odd. So why was that the case? And the last question we're going to really look at first, it comes from the first source on here from Jeremiah. Now, this is where this song that we're going to hear at the end of the shir comes from. Now, this verse of Jeremiah, we get this image of a woman, this image of Rachel. Now, look at the English. It says, the English is a bit funny, so we just have to ignore the archaic language. It says, "Thus said the Lord, a cry is heard, wailing, bitter weeping. Rachel is crying for her children who are gone. Thus said the Lord, don't cry, basically stop crying. Don't cry any more tears, for there is reward for your labor." Basically, they shall return from their land. God is giving a promise in Jeremiah that the Jewish people will eventually be redeemed. And we see that Rachel is directly linked to this idea of redemption. She's directly linked to this concept of the Jewish people returning to their land again. And there's a midrash that is based on this verse. And the midrash explains that Rachel is crying over the Jewish people being dispersed and scattered into exile and all the terrible things that have befallen us. And it says that the midrash explains that lots of different characters in history sort of like went to God, so to speak, and said, can I cry? Can I beseech on their behalf? Abraham went to them, to God, and God said, no, he didn't listen. Yitzchak went. Yitzchak, who was willing to be offered up as the Akedah, as a sacrifice, he wasn't good enough. We have Moshe, who was the greatest leader we've ever had. He was also refused. But yet the only person who God listened to at this juncture was Rachel, was Rachel. And we're told that it's her, it is Rachel, who will be sitting, waiting for us at the sort of like gate, so to speak, for when the Jewish people are going to be returned back to the land of Israel. So the question is why? What is it about Rachel that really gives her this merit that we're going to be redeemed in her honor? So that's all the questions that we're really going to be looking at, and they'll be answered really quite through one or two sort of answers that will encapsulate everything. So Rachel and Leah, the two sisters, are the last of the 4 matriarchs, and they are the mother of the 12 tribes, the beginning of the 12 tribes of Israel. And even though we're going to be looking mainly at Rachel today, we're obviously going to be focusing a bit on Leah because their stories are intrinsically intertwined. So it's very hard to separate them out. So the first time that we are introduced to Rachel in the Torah is in the parasha of Vayetze, which is source number 2. And we are told that she was a shepherdess. She was the shepherdess of her father Laban's sheep. And we are told that all the shepherds used to go to this well. And we're told here, you can see the underlined bit, that the stone on the mouth of the well was very, very large. And it's very interesting because why on earth do I care? Why do we care how big the stone was on top of the well? What relevance has this got to any part of the story? We're told that all the shepherds used to come around, they used to hang around the well. We know lots of things happened. It was like a matchmaking scene around the well. Often people met their husbands and wives there. In this case, we're not discussing that for now. But why do we care how large the rock is over the well? And the answer that Rashi gives is that the people that Rachel comes from, the family in which she was born into, the Armenians, they were so concerned that other people would get more than their fair share of water, that they put this huge stone on top of the well so that other people would have to be around to watch everyone else help them roll the stone off and then get the allotted amount of water for their sheep and themselves, because they were worried that if it was like just a piece of wood on top, that anybody could just come, take the wood off, get too much water, and it wouldn't be fair for everyone else. And therefore, by having this huge stone on top of the well, it meant that ultimately they needed like a monitor, needed somebody there to make sure that nobody would take too much water compared to other people. So we see that this is where Rachel comes from. She comes from a community that is very self-absorbed, very untrusting of other people, and also they don't trust others and people don't trust them. It's not a very nice community that she comes from. And this is where Rachel grows up. And we get the impression right away from the text that Rachel is somebody who is very, very confident. She is a woman shepherdess in amongst all these men. She is very competent and confident in her job. She goes alone. And also we see from source number 3 that Leah, it says here, had weak eyes. We'll get to that in a second. And Rachel was shapely, and it's a very strange word to use, but she was very beautiful to look at. She was physically beautiful, but also the commentators explain that she also was beautiful on the inside. And again, it's very important to know that she was very beautiful on the inside, despite where she grew up, despite this sort of like this background that she was living amongst. Another note, very interesting, that Rachel's name, the name Rachel actually means like a little sheep, like a lamb. I never knew this before. That's what the name translates as. And again, that's going to become very relevant a bit later on when we discuss a little bit more about Rachel's character. So we see here that Leah has very weak eyes. Now, the word weak is a strange translation. It basically means she had very red, sore eyes. And we're told that her eyes were so red and so weak because she spent her whole life crying. She was crying all the time because she felt, or she sort of like saw into the future, that she was going to be betrothed to Esav because she was the oldest and Esav was the oldest. And then Rachel was going to marry Yaakov because they were the youngest of the siblings. And Esav did not have a very good reputation, and therefore she was very upset and very worried that she was going to spend her whole life married to this man that she didn't want to be married to, and she spent her whole life crying. So again, just from this verse, we get an impression of what these two characters are like. We see that Leah is somebody who's quite pessimistic, actually. She looks at things in a very negative way. And again, it's for another share about Leah's personality, but we'll see that same character trait a bit later on. And Rachel is somebody who looks totally the opposite. She's somebody who looks much more to the positive, much more to the future. And she was beautiful in the way that she perceived other people, perceived the world around her, and how people perceived her as well. So the fact that she, I'm going to move down one second. The fact that what we know next in the story chronologically is that, yes, we know that Jacob meets Rachel and he wants to marry her. But what happens? He works and then ultimately he gets tricked, or whatever the whole story is. And Leah marries Yaakov instead of Rachel. Rachel does the ultimate sacrifice and gives her beloved to her sister rather than marrying him first. And not only that, she gives her the signs, as we know, not to embarrass her. And I think it's really important that we see that that story comes directly after this incident with the stone up here on the well. Because where does Rachel come from? Rachel comes from a place where people are constantly looking at the worst in other people. Oh my gosh, imagine they might take a drop more water than they're allotted. There's not going to be enough for my sheep. Everyone's so worried about themselves and not worried about another person, about the other sheep, about the rest of their community. That's where Rachel grew up. But yet, what does Rachel do? She takes that environment and she sort of grows out of that environment and becomes a person that is willing to give her own sister her husband, to give her sister something that she loves so much and that she wants and that she's been waiting to marry for so many years. And I think it's a very interesting point for all of us, is that it doesn't really matter where we're from. It doesn't always matter what our families are like. It doesn't matter what our backgrounds are. It doesn't matter where we were brought up or what schools you went to. None of that is relevant, because wherever, even in the worst situations, we can always grow out of it and we can always better ourselves to become better individuals than where we came from. And it also works the other way as well. But just for now, focusing on this point at the moment. So we see from her, the first really thing that we can learn from her is that just because you're born in a certain environment, it does not define you. You can become better than that environment by working on yourself, which we're going to see in a second. Now, this becomes even more pertinent when we see how Rachel deals with her fertility issues a bit later on in the story. And actually, as a side note, it's always very interesting that so many of the matriarchs suffered with infertility. It's not really for now, but it's a very, very interesting point in the Tanakh that we can maybe discuss another time. So we see now that in this source over here, source number 4, so now if you skip ahead in the storyline chronologically, Leah has married Yaakov, and then Rachel eventually marries Yaakov. And what happens is that Leah has children, one child, another child, and Rachel is barren. And we have an impression of Rachel that she's a very kind, considerate, compassionate, very, good tzaddikus, really. That's how we think of her. But look at this verse over here. Look at source number 4. What does she say? We'll just read the Hebrew quickly. It says, Vatera Rachel saw, ki lo yalda, that she did not have any children. Vat kaneh Rachel, and she became very, very jealous of her sister. So that's the first thing. We see that we suddenly are starting to see that actually she's a human being. She's not just somebody who's a perfect individual. She actually is a person that has feelings and emotions, and she struggles just like everyone else. And we see here, it states very clearly she was jealous. And then it says, this is very strange. And she says to Jacob, she says to her husband, Hava li banim, give me children, the im ayin, and if you don't, meta anochi, I'm going to die. She screams at her husband. You can imagine the scene, right? She's at home. She hears the children of her sister playing in the garden, and she basically goes crazy. And she says, It's not fair. You have given my sister children and I can't have children. Give me children or I'm going to die. Now, there's so many problems with this sentence. Primarily, does she not realize that it's not Jacob who's not giving her children? Jacob is able to produce children because he produced a child with Leah, or children with Leah. So why is she screaming at Jacob as if it's his fault? Because it's not his fault why they can't have children. It's not the issue. Why is she screaming at him? That's the first thing. And second of all, doesn't she know she's meant to be Rachel the tzaddikas, Rachel the matriarch? Doesn't she know that it comes from God, not from a man who determines who has a child and who doesn't? So why here do we see her giving ultimatums to Jacob in this way? And my understanding is that Rachel, in this point, she sees Jacob as somebody who has a tremendous amount of yichus, a tremendous amount of holy lineage. His father was Isaac. His grandfather was Abraham, the father of monotheism, right? They've got very, very important, their family tree is very impressive. And she says, and she thinks, who am I? I'm from Lavan. I'm from a terrible household, a community where people don't trust each other. People don't like each other. She basically is saying to Jacob, you have a better chance of God listening to you than I do. So why can't you pray for me? Why is it that you're not helping me? It's not going to work if I ask God. You need to ask because you have got the keys. You've got the secret code to God's ears, and he will listen to you much more than he will listen to me. Now, what does Jacob say here? Jacob teaches her and eventually teaches us a very, very important lesson. Now, there's a few problems with the next verse, which we're going to get into in a second, but the next verse comes directly after verse number 2, and it says, Vayicha af Yaakov. It's a very, very so angry with Rachel. He is so furious with her. And he says, can I take the place of God? Is it my fault that you don't have any children? Like, I'm not God. Why are you screaming to me? Why are you shouting at me? I can't do anything to help you. That's how he responds. Now, it's interesting because he actually was told off by the commentators for behaving in this way. And it again teaches us a very important lesson that we have to be extremely sensitive to people, even if there's nothing we can do to help in a particular situation. Behaving in this manner is not the way we should be behaving. And he is, again, he's a human being and he made this mistake, and the commentators all pick up on it and say, this is not how we should be behaving. Conversely, we should be somebody, if that happens in any situation, people are asking for our help, and even if we can't help them, we should always make sure to have a listening ear and to try and be there for them, even if we can't physically do anything to help. But why does he behave in this way? Why does he react so strongly? And he's here to teach us a lesson. He is saying to us, Yaakov is saying, nobody can feel the pain like you. Nobody can understand the suffering that you are going through apart from you. I don't understand it because I have children. I can't feel what it's like not to have a child. He teaches her, you have to pray for yourself. You have to be your own advocate in Judaism. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter who your father is or who your grandfather is or who your father isn't. That is irrelevant. What is most important is how you connect to Judaism and how you connect to God, because that is the only way in which you are going to get what you want. And again, it teaches us a very important lesson, that sometimes we can rely on other people to do our Judaism for us. May it be people in our family, maybe our shul, may it be whatever it is, whichever way you want to look at it. We can rely on others. And I think especially pre-pandemic, it was even more so. We could sit in shul, the chazan could daven for us, and we would just sit there really, just listening. The guy with the person would lane, and we could just follow along. But now we've seen firsthand that we have to be so proactive in our Judaism to make sure that it's relevant to us. Otherwise, we can just let it fly away without really having any connection to it. So here he's teaching her that you have to pray for yourself. You have to have the connection to God and with God in order to ask him for what you want. It's irrelevant. Again, this links into what we were saying before about where she comes from. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter who your parents are. What matters more is who you are as an individual and your relationship that you have with God at this point. Now, what is the most amazing thing here is how Rachel responds. Because imagine if that was you in your family, right? And someone said to you, and you were trying to explain how upset you were, and all they do is shout back at you. What are you going to do? You're going to shout back in return. You don't understand what I'm saying. You don't understand my feelings. You're so insensitive, shouting back, which is what mom would imagine. But what does Rachel do at this point? Rachel realizes what Jacob was trying to do. And instead, she gives, at this point, her maidservant to Jacob as a wife. And from that, she then has a child. And from that, she, the future of the Jewish people continue through that juncture as well. And again, it's a really impressive character trait of Rachel that she holds back on her instinct, I would say, to say, it's not my fault, but she says, no, I realize I've made a mistake. I realize that I have to work on myself a little bit, and I'm going to react by doing straight away, immediately, the next verse we see that she goes off and does this thing by giving her maidservant. And what is even more impressive is that Jacob notices that we mentioned that her name, Rachel's name, Rachel, means like a little lamb, like a tiny sheep kind of a animal, which is interesting again that she was a shepherdess. But what do lambs, sheep, little animals like to do? They like to be coddled, they like to be held, they like to be hugged. The people like to be around them. And that really was Rachel's characteristic, it was her character trait. People loved to be around her. She had this aura around her. The people worked for her. We see Jacob worked for all those years for her. She made people feel good, and people were happy to do things on her behalf. I'm sure we can all think of people that is very similar. We all want to be around people that are positive and people that are beautiful on the inside and the outside. We want to be around them. But Jacob is saying, no, it's not good enough for other people to do things on your behalf. You need to be proactive. You need to get up and do something yourself. Enough of other people doing things for you. And again, it's really impressive that her name is actually her essence. We know from in the time of the Tanakh, the names that they were given really was the person that they were. Abraham, Haman, Hagoyim, he was the father of the nations. We see that was the person who he was. And so too with Rachel, she was that person. That was her characteristic. But she realized, I can't stay this way, even though it is so the person that I am. It's so the person that I was always, I was born to be, and she changed. And again, it's something that's really interesting because I think so many times we feel like I'm just an impatient person. I'm just an angry person. I'm just an ungiving, or, whatever it is. We can put in whatever verb or adjective. Don't quote me. I don't know. I'm not very good at English. Whatever I'm just that kind of a person, and nothing's going to change. I'm just that way inclined. That's the way I was born, and nothing's going to change. But she's teaching us that's not true. Her essence, her name, she was called a little lamb. And she said, no, even though it's so difficult and that's the way that I was born, I'm going to move away from it. And straight away, immediately, she gives her maidservant to Yaakov. She goes against her nature to make herself better. Now we get to the end of the story, an even stranger scenario. So here we have this episode of the Dudayim. Now what happens here is that Reuven, who is the eldest son of Leah, he goes off to the field. And he brings back these flowers, these Dudayim. And it's very, very interesting. We're going to look over here. He says, Rachel says, so it says here, Reuben came along and he brought these flowers. And Rachel said to Leah, please, can I have some of the flowers that your son has brought? And what does Leah respond? Over here, she says, Vatomela, and she says to her, Hame'at kachtech et ishi, was it not enough that you took my husband? And now you want to take away my flowers? This is how she's responding. All Rachel's asked is for a few of the flowers that her son picked for free. She's asking for a couple of flowers to put in her vase in her house. And Leah loses it. She loses the plot. She goes crazy. How dare you? You've taken my husband and now you want to take away my flowers. But how does Rachel respond? And this is the key to answering our questions. She responds with this word over here. Vatomer Rachel, and Rachel says, Lachen, therefore, because of what I've just seen, therefore, Yishkav imach halayla, tonight you can have Yaakov. Tonight, he was meant to come to my tent tonight, but tonight he can go to your tent. It's a very strange scenario, but just ignore that for a second. Tonight, he can go and be with you rather than being with me. What's going on here? Again, think about it in modern day scenarios. Your sister is screaming at you, and rather than screaming back, what does she say? She takes a step back. Lachen. She puts a full stop. She says, her eyes are opened at this juncture to all the pain that her sister has suffered for all of those years. Because can you imagine, her son Reuben here is old enough to go pick flowers. So you can picture how long they've been married for. So you can sort of figure out how long this whole scenario has been dragging on, that her husband has been married. Oh, people are trying, oh, okay, something's flashing. That her husband has been trying to, has been married. And she says, no, even though Rachel understands herself that she has suffered tremendously throughout her life, she had to wait to marry her husband, and give her to Leah. She then had to suffer with infertility for many, many, many years. She says, I have my own suffering, and I've only thought of it in my perspective. But lachen, now I see and I feel your pain. I can step into your shoes and I see this bubbling anger that you've had inside of you for all of these years. And again, rather than shouting back at her, rather than retaliating, she takes a step back and she says, I understand your pain, and I see things from your perspective. And I understand that even though my life has been really, really hard over these years, because it has been really, really challenging, I can understand that your life too has also been a struggle. Even though you've managed to have children and I haven't, I can now really see your pain. And what does she do? Again, it's the immediacy, that's even a word, the immediate action that she takes, just like she did when she gave her maidservant to Yaakov. She says, lachen, straight away, without blinking, she says, therefore, you can have Yaakov tonight. Yaakov can be with you. It's this immediate response of like, oh my gosh, I need to change the way that I am. I'm going to do it now. I'm not going to wait. I'm going to change the way that I am right this second. If we don't do it now, it's never going to happen. And this compassion for another human being, even though she herself is suffering, even though she herself is drowning in her own pain, it's this compassion for another person's feelings that is the answer to the question of why it is Rachel that is the person that is going to be waiting for us when we all return back to Israel. Because in our lives, we are all surrounded by, we all have struggles all the time. I mean, now more than ever, we're all dealing with our own struggles daily, weekly, or things are going on all the time for all of us with lockdown. But for us to feel another person's pain when we ourselves are going through pain as well, that is true heroism. That's when we truly are acting like Rachel, truly with compassion, because we can step out of our own pain for a second and look and feel what it's like to be that other person, to look at something from another person's perspective. So that's answered like the question really as to why it is Rachel that is the one that will be waiting for us when, please God, we are all returned back to the land of Israel. However, the question still remains about the side of the road. Rachel was she was buried at the side of the road, really, rather than being in the cave of Machpelah. And I think that maybe Rachel is one of the people in the Tanakh that we can relate to more than anyone else, because her life seems quite unfinished. Imagine she has 2 children, neither of whom she gets to see grow up, because she dies giving birth to one of them, Binyamin. And she even tries to name her son. She says that I want to name him Ben Oni, the son of my affliction. And what does her husband do, Yaakov? He changes the name to Binyamin. So she doesn't even get the satisfaction of her son's name being the name that she wants, right? She doesn't get to see them grow up. And she doesn't even get to be buried in the cave of Machpelah. She doesn't even get the ending that all the other matriarchs and patriarchs get, the final resting place, to be buried in the cave of Machpelah. The ending is not so clear for her. She's sort of on the way. She's on the journey still. And on the journey is really signified by the fact that she's buried on the side of the road. And I think this is really, in our day and age, this is really how we all are. Very few people, I mean, none of us are privy to understand the workings of God, why things happen in certain people, why we suffer, what's going on in the world. We don't understand it. And we are all going on a journey that we don't know the end. We don't know the impact that we have on other people. We don't know the end result of many of our actions. We don't know how it's going to end up. I think it's interesting that, Captain Tom Moore passed away today. I think he's one of the very, very few individuals who probably saw the impact of his life in his lifetime. He, at 100 years old, he actually saw what the incredible thing that he was able to achieve most of us don't get that. Most of us don't get claps outside our front door at 6 o'clock in the evening when after 120 years when we die, because we don't know the legacy that we're going to be leaving. We're on a journey. We're on the journey, and that's really part of being vulnerable human beings. And that's what Rachel was. Rachel was vulnerable, and Rachel was on the journey. And that's why we can relate to her so much more than any of the other matriarchs and patriarchs that are buried in the cave of Machpelah, at the final resting place that so many people go to pray at in Hebron even now. So what really are like the take-home messages from Rachel, so to speak? What can we really learn from her? I think there's three major things. First of all, I think is the idea of sacrifice, is that she sacrificed, first of all, her love, her beloved Yaakov, for her sister. And also she sacrificed her place in the cave of Machpelah, her final resting place, to be our advocate, to be the person who'll be at the side of the road crying on our behalf, welcoming the Jewish people, please God, when we return back to the land of Israel. So there's a huge amount of sacrifice that she did for other people. Second of all, I think, is the idea of compassion. The idea of being compassionate, not just, oh, I really see you're struggling, I really feel sorry for you. No, was that she had compassion even when she herself was feeling down, even when she had a legitimate reason to be depressed and downhearted. She stepped out of her own feelings to make other people feel better. And I think that is a huge, incredible characteristic that we can all try and emulate and learn from her. And I think the third point, the final point, is about change, is that she realized that life is not, we as people are not stagnant. We need to be fluid in the way that we are. We need to be open to change, opening to changing our characteristics, our character traits, even if they are so a part of us that it's our name, right? Her name was Rachel. Her name was Little Lamb that people would coddle, but she changed. She was willing to go out of her comfort zone to change and become a better person and to help more people. So that's really what I think is the reason why, there aren't many Jewish women who've got songs that are named after them, like we have with Mama Rachel, with Mama Rachel. And on that note, I want to share with you, to end, one of the songs that was written about Rachel, about this story of her sitting on high, crying on our behalf. So I was doing a bit of research on YouTube, trying to find the best video to share everyone. And there's a few different tunes. One of them is a Shrekky one. So if you want to Google that, you can Google that. But I didn't like the video, so I didn't want to show that one. And it's also very, very long. Another one was an Eitan Katz one. Again, you can Google it. It was fantastic, but I didn't love the video. But this one was fantastic. And I love the song, really pulled on my heartstrings. And I'm actually going to have the words up so you can follow along with the Hebrew and the English and the transliteration, so you can see what the words actually mean. But when I was looking on it on YouTube, the singer, Simcha Leiner, he actually had put together this song in memory of the Fogel family who were killed by terrorists in Israel a few years ago. And he made like a montage of the funeral and everything else. And the whole idea is that, Rachel is still crying for her children because there are still terrible things happening to our people. And she's still sitting there crying and beseeching God on our behalf and to stop these terrible things from happening. So I didn't want to show you that one because I was bawling when I was watching it. And if you want to watch it yourself, you can. So I'm going to show you the one without the video montage, but that's where the song came from. And the song is like in their memory, which what you'll see on the bottom. So this over here, hopefully it will come up. Yeah. So over here, this is the Hebrew, and you can follow along and see in case you've never heard the song before, and that's the English translation. It's based on Jeremiah that we looked at, the idea of Rachel sitting and crying for us. So this is the song. We just play it and I'll put the words back on in a second. Hopefully it will work. Okay, so again, by Simcha Leiner. Hopefully you'll hear. Can everyone hear? concludes the share. Let me just make sure it doesn't go onto another YouTube video. Something else come up. That concludes the share, and I think really the song to me is a very emotive song, and I think this is really what Rachel is about. That Rachel really cries for her children who still are suffering and struggling with the emotions and the pains that we're all dealing with really all the time at the moment, especially now. So hopefully you all learned something new about Rachel. I definitely did when I was preparing it, and lovely to see you all. If anyone has any questions, obviously you can ask, and feel free to unmute yourself and say hello. Have a good evening.